Who did most of the writing of the songs? Do you write together? Does one of you write? How does that work?
Well, usually it begins with me sitting down and writing guitar progressions or guitar licks, having ideas. Sometimes a short idea, sometimes I sort of flesh it out with verses and choruses, bridges, and the whole song. And then typically I would first go to Matt, and Matt would listen, try to come up with a vocal line, a melody, see what he hears, see what changes he wants to
So
make.
for you, the music comes first, not the lyric.
Oh yeah. Matt likes to sing lyrics that Matt writes and can emotionally get into in a way that I think is harder for you when they're not your own. So we sort of have a division of responsibility there, and so I try to come up with progressions that I think are conducive to a vocal line. And sometimes I see something there, sometimes Matt, I hear something, sometimes Matt does, sometimes it does, sometimes it takes a while, sometimes we shelve something and come around to it later. So it's sort of an iterative process, and then we go to the full band, we go to Mark, we go to James, we sort of put together, here's what we've got. They can hear Matt sing it, they can hear us play it together. And
So Matt, can you tell me about writing the lyrics? What is your writing process? So you hear the music first, or do you have like a book that you keep lyrics in, and how does that all?
A little of both, yeah. Dave will send me these riffs, and I'll just listen to them over and over, and I'll be listening to them in the car and singing, and just see what words kind of feel good in that spot, and then I'll hear those words and think, okay, how can I craft some meaning around those words? We wrote this one song called "Going Not Leaving." It's on our EP, and the first lyric was like, "I'm not sorry." The syllables of that, it just fit perfectly as a phrase, and I thought, okay, what am I not sorry about? And that launched me into this story about my dad, and it was just a kind of cathartic song to write. They come in different ways, and sometimes they don't come quickly enough. Dave writes the riffs. I'll sit with the words for maybe a couple of weeks, and then we'll bring it to these guys, and it becomes a song unbelievably quickly because they're all so talented.
Well, Dave is incredibly prolific, so we have hours worth of his little riff phrases and noodles. Some of them are just, here's a riff, here's an idea. Some of them are fleshed out. So there's quite a lot to draw upon, and Matt's definitely a storyteller, which is.
I write one word like a month, so
yeah.
So it does take a while.
It might take a while.
Let me ask you about some other of the songs. November's Call. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
November's Call.
Well, there's a musical evolution to it for sure, and there is a lyrical evolution.
Talk about the
music. Musically, I remember sitting in my basement. I came up with a chord progression using a tremolo effect. It was very melodic, wasn't linear. I remember I sent it to Matt. I remember where I was at a shop. He called me. He said, I think we just wrote our next song. And musically it came together, and the chord progression, generally speaking, evolved very quickly. And it's one of our more unique chord progressions. It became kind of true in the studio that there was no way in the world that I was ever going to be able to record it the way the effect was working. I wouldn't be able to replicate it reliably enough. So we played around, Derek and I played around with a lot of different ways of recording it. And And then at some point in the studio, probably, you know, every song that I would record with Derek was probably between 5 and 7 hours in an evening after work. Every song. So, you know, we recorded 12 songs there, you know, that I myself just recording for 50, 60, 70 hours with Derek. Some moments there were frustration. Sometimes Derek was frustrated. Sometimes I was sort of, I don't know what you want me to do here, but Derek took a smoke break, went outside, I picked up my guitar and I started playing the chords in a particular way, and he came back and he said, whatever that was, that's it. He went over, he hit record, and that became one of the guitar tracks that adds a little bit of the rhythmic sort of Duran-ish kind of funk aspect to that particular song. But lyrically, that's all Matt.
Lyrically, it's inspired by a lot of childhood memories of listening to records at various friends' houses, and how I kind of experienced each one of my friends' households through where their record player was. I mean, that's the inspiration of the lyrics. It's one of the reasons why there's a tone arm in the design of our record album, is because so many of our memories of music are through the tactile experience of having a vinyl record in our hand, and the feeling that you got when you listened.
That's a great example of Derek being like the additional member of the band, right? He's the producer, and I've never worked with somebody so intimately as a producer. Usually you go in and here's my thing and you record it and they make it sound good. But he was a true partner and member. And so that in-depth working transformed that song quite a bit.
For sure.
And he was assessing all these things because he wanted us to use our influences, but sound like Athensville, which is sometimes tricky, believe it or not. And so he accessed Bowie, that kind of guitar and fame, and then for me and James, it's like, let's focus in on like new wave, Duran Duran, dance music. And so it was a blend of styles that came up with something pretty unique.
And so you spend all this time crafting the songs, sitting with these guys and editing the songs, and then we all get in the room and we start rehearsing them, and that's a completely different energy, right? So the energy there is, I'm pushing for disco, and Derek's like, no more disco. And like, let's go more toward Bowie, let's try to do some of that more 70s rock stuff. And so it's beyond just the core of the songs, then the music becomes a completely different emotion because of that difference in energy in the rehearsing of the actual songs. And suddenly it changes even from what you thought it was going to be going into that rehearsal.
Great.
So it's very
I've come to believe that there are people for whom music is part of their fabric. And I work a lot, and I think maybe there have been times where I was working too much to the omission of other parts of my life, whether it's family or music. And there was a moment, probably a good decade plus ago, where I realized that I needed to play more. So I personally started taking guitar lessons again. It had been probably 20 years since I had taken lessons, but it just sort of, you realize it's something that you have to do. And then when you meet people who are like-minded, we've all, I think, all said to each other many times throughout this process, when things were difficult, when the pandemic was challenging us, when we were having issues with family, with jobs, whatever stresses we were having, that we need, need this. This we need to succeed. And we also try to remind each other, this is the fun part, not to take ourselves too seriously. So it's a balance between working hard, but I think, the challenges are daily. The challenges are, balance. The challenges are satisfying that need to make music and to push ourselves to make good music.
I quit music a few times. I had some really promising starts with some very crushing downfalls in a few occasions, and band members dying. Back when I lived in New York, my keyboard player and one of my best friends died of AIDS, and I just had a lot of death and heartbreak and loss, and it caused me to want to quit music, and I quit a few times, and something or other kind of brought me back in, and then coping mechanisms became substances. So many years ago, I became a sober person, and I gave up all the substances, and I thought, well, I can't play music anymore because, you know, that's the world. You know, that's that world that did all that damage to me. And somebody said, you know, there's a way you can do it. There's a way you can do it. You know, think about it when it's the right time. I said, you know what? I'm going to ask for sober band members. So I did, and I had a sober band, and that band was quite successful. And fast forward, here I am today playing music for love, you know, and I definitely have a love affair with these guys. We're a family. This pandemic year, focusing on this band and this album was the highlight of the pandemic year. It was possibly the only highlight of the pandemic year. We needed each other. We relied on each other, and we had some ups and downs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I ask how many years you've been sober?
In August, it will be, 28.
Wow,
27
congratulations.
right now, so,
Congratulations.
It was the best thing I ever did.
Yeah. Well, that is quite an accomplishment and quite a challenge to get and stay sober.
Well, I don't even crave it or want it, because everything in my life at that time that I thought caused me to need drinking and substances, those things have been replaced with great relationships, you know, family, friends, music, the creative things, the beauty of life, art, all of those things that are so much more important and so much more satisfying. So I don't even miss it.
Yeah, I think for me, you know, there's definitely something about going through the phases of your life and finally getting to a point where you feel, and it's more in the line of what Matt and I have talked about in terms of our meditation practice and Buddhism in general, but you finally get to a place where you can use the word contentment and understand what that means, right? And I remember having a discussion with my daughter about the fact that someone could walk up behind me and slap their hands and I wouldn't react. That's how comfortable I've become, how I've lost the level of anxiety that I kind of grew up with and had as a young adult. And again, kind of fortunately coming to that point a year prior to a pandemic, and then being 24/7 at home with other human beings, when for the most part I'd rather be in a cave writing my manuscript about CEOs. You didn't edit that out. Right? You didn't have to use the word, but so, you know, you get to a point with living with adult children and a spouse and working at home constantly 24/7, everyone being home all the time. For a personality like me who needs my alone time and privacy, really what helped that was the ability to have a reason to leave the house. And that was this record process, because otherwise there's not a whole lot asking you to leave the house. And to have this as a reason and as an excuse to move away from the constant, you know, kind of like crushing everyone around you at all times during a pandemic, it seriously was the reason that I came out of this as a healthy person. So yeah, my parents, Beatles, and my mom, Barry Manilow, my sister, older.
Did you just say Gordon Lightfoot and Barry Manilow?
In the
Of course.
same breath?
Yes.
say your parents and your mom?
I said my parents, my mom, your mom.
I don't think of Gordon Lightfoot, and I'm a huge fan of Gordon Lightfoot and Barry Manilow, but like you're in like rock and roll. I don't think of that.
I know. I can't explain it. So my older brother, Kansas Sticks, Journey, yes, all that stuff, Prague, and Dan Fogelberg and James Taylor, right? So just a wide variety. And then, the Barry Manilow thing was important to me.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, he's an amazing songwriter.
Yeah, it's just one of those things. Well, my sister loved Barry Manilow, and at some point, much after the years of his great success, brought this CD to her husband, who hates Barry Manilow, and it was all jazz piano that Barry Manilow finally had a chance to record.
Very
and of course, she
nice.
didn't explain that it was Barry Manilow, and he was incredibly impressed because he's an amazing jazz pianist. And so that's just another side note about Barry Manilow. Should I talk more about Barry Manilow?
Yeah. What did Barry Manilow do on the weekend?
So Barry Manilow.
Oh, he goes to New England.
Now, do you like pre-cosmetic surgery or post-cosmetic
Yeah.
surgery?
So the band was going to be Barry Manilow.
Barry Manilow, Winter Vortex.
Toxic Vortex.
And this is why we have an ad for a new drummer.
So what would you say to young people who want to be musicians or rock and roll stars and dream about putting out an album with their band? What words of caution or advice would you give them?
Do all the little things right. Be businesslike in your approach to it. Rock and roll has an aura of people who don't give a crap about this and that. They're just rock and roll stars, and they just want to have fun and party and blah blah blah. And yes, it's a lot of fun, and but you got to be making the connections with people, and following up on emails, and getting out there, hitting the streets, and getting your CD into the hand of everybody. And it's a lot of work. Like bands that are successful, no one just falls backwards into this.
Right, you can have all the talent you want, but if you're just a dreamer, you're not gonna. And dreaming is definitely part of it, right? You have to have a sense of we have something special here, a little bit of blinders on, so that you're not overwhelmed by all of the other bands that are all trying to do the same thing, right? So you've got to have a little bit of the blinders on, imagination, a dreamlike, childish kind of approach to what you want to accomplish, but also put the work into. You're not going to be discovered for the most part, right? You need to force yourself to be discovered. You need to get out there and do the work to do
I want to thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you.
that. So much.